so much for being here. Amongst all of the events you could have been at, it's really nice to see you here for our event, which is From Conflict to Collaboration, Transforming Institutions for Gender Equality. I hope you've had a really great week at CSW. My name is Andrea Salguero. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the Baha'i Community of Canada. I will be the co-moderator for today's panel discussion. Alongside my colleague, Ava Momtazian, and she's the Director of Public Affairs for the Baha'i Community of Australia. So this is a co-sponsored event between our two communities. And one of the things that really unites Canada and Australia is that both of our countries have a process of reconciliation underway at all levels of society at this time. And so I'd like to begin today's panel with an acknowledgement that we are on the traditional lands of the Lenape people. And Manhattan is actually the Lenape word for hilly place. And the area where we are used to be a wooded area with an abundance of wildlife and sandy shores. And so today, amidst the skyscrapers, we honor the Lenape people, their culture, their teachings, and their land. And the focus of today's event is on this idea of institutional transformation. And when we're deciding on what to discuss, we really thought of institutions because all of these diverse institutions in our society, if we think of those related to education, governance, finance, commerce, these are powerful shapers of behavior. And these institutions often provide the social spaces where women are either encouraged to greater and more meaningful participation in public life, or conversely, these are the spaces where women encounter significant barriers to participation. Institutions are also more than the sum of their parts. They're more just than the aggregate of the individuals that work within them. And so we can see institutions as a reflection of our culture and the values that lead to their creation and the values that sustain them. So what we've heard at CSW this week is that there's a collective challenge ahead of all of the states, really ahead of all of us in this room here today. And that's to profoundly transform institutions that have historically been founded on patriarchal values such as control, domination, competition, and to transform them into institutions that are founded on new principles, including a strongly held commitment to gender equality. So the panelists you will hear today were invited to bring their diverse experiences to bear on some reflection questions, including how can institutions and the broader cultures that sustain them be recast according to principles of equality and justice? And how can a range of institutions not only permit, but actively foster the advancement of women? So today's discussion, we're hoping to keep it to about an hour and leave lots of time to have a facilitated discussion afterwards, where you'll be able to ask questions. And for those on Zoom that are joining us, welcome. And you can write your questions in the chat that's being actively moderated. After the presentation, there'll be some light refreshments so you can stay and chat with each other. I will now open the floor to Beatrice Maé for opening remarks. Thank you very much for being here today. Though I understand you'll have to leave a little bit early. Beatrice Maé is the Minister, Counselor, and Legal Advisor at the Permanent Mission of Canada to the United Nations. Ms. Maé recently served as Senior Legal and Team Leader on UN reforms, budget, and legal affairs in the Office of the President of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Previously, as a career diplomat, Ms. Maé served as the Director General of Legal Affairs and Deputy Legal Advisor at Global Affairs Canada. She held other senior positions, including Executive Director of Criminal Security and Diplomatic Law and Director General of the Consular Policy Bureau. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Andrea, and thanks again for welcoming me again this year to this lovely place and this very dynamic conversation. It was such a great event last year, and I'm happy to be back with you today. So this year, I hope you all have felt the electricity in the air with the CSW starting. And we are really at an inflection point on gender equality and multilateralism. It's not a secret that it's an unstable and scary world, and for many, especially for women and girls. In too many places, we see when safety and security are threatened, we also see the backsliding on fundamental rights for women and girls. And I just have to think, for example, about Haiti or Afghanistan or other places. Our collective challenge, you mentioned, Andrea, is true. And we, Canada, remain steadfast that gender equality is not negotiable. It is a fundamental human right that must be protected. And to do so, we need to work with civil society, the private sector, young leaders, Indigenous peoples and others to transform institutions, ensuring that they are fit for purpose and empowered to deliver an ambition and important mandate. For institutions to effectively deliver on gender equality, they must be steeped in the tenets of intersectionality, non-discrimination, diversity and inclusion, and transparency and accountability. This is why, again, Canada at the CSW this year is advancing several priorities, but including advancing human rights and encountering anti-gender backlash. We were actually having a lunch on this with a few countries at lunchtime, and strengthening institution and social protection systems. We can all agree that the public institution play a critical role, as you were mentioning, either way. And so, but I am a believer that it is an advancing gender equality when all the ingredients are there. And we also know that strengthening social protection system goes hand in hand with economic resilience and empowerment. So it's clear that empowering organizations working on gender equality is vital to strengthen institution more broadly. And they can definitely play a catalyst role for change. Change in laws, in attitudes, in norms and practices. And broadening and maintaining the civic space for progress on women and girls' rights, but also for women's voices. I find the most interesting and fabulous part about CSW is that I hear voices that we don't usually hear. And those are important. They're more nuanced. They're ingrained in fact and knowledge. And I think it's really important to listen. This is why Canada has provided flexible and dedicated funding to equality-seeking organization and movement through the Women Voices in Leadership program, which has now reached over 1,500 women's rights organizations since it's launched in 2017. We've also established other funds that have been critical in leveraging a giving platform for women advocates. While supporting grassroots organizations is part of the equation, we also have to not to forget the importance of the UN as a centerpiece of the rule-based international system. Maybe like me on Monday morning when you were sitting in the GAR and you were counting the 4th male speaker and the 5th male speaker before we heard this wonderful voice by this woman activist from India. You kind of were wondering. And I hope that, it just shows that we still have a lot of work to do, but we can do that work together. We were very pleased to hear the Secretary General launching this new UN system-wide gender equality acceleration plan on March 8th, and we've been inquiring on how it's going to be put in action. But we are also pleased to hear some voices who are working from the inside. I was having lunch with Shauna Holney, the Canadian expert on the International Civil Service Commission, which is a non-known body of the UN. But she's been quite active actually in making sure that the UN would adopt a parental leave a program across all institutions that would give the same to all men or women parents and giving opportunities. So we can do things for gender equality in all our little ways. Finally, I should note that Ambassador Ray will be become the president of the Economic and Social Council as of the end of July of this year until next year, 2025. And we really look forward to the opportunity to, as the president of ECOSOC, to also embrace Beijing Plus 30 and the anniversary of the Declaration Platform of Action. So really happy to be here today. Apologies if I will have to leave a little bit early, but again, looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you, Beatrice. It's wonderful to have you with us again. And thank you to anyone who's joined us as well. I wanted to also acknowledge the presence of Lorraine Finlay, the Australian Human Rights Commissioner, who's also joining us online. Thank you. I know it's early. Speaking of human rights and the human rights that you also mentioned, the situation is so dire right now. I think in reconceptualizing what it means to be a human is really a key question that underlies a lot of the questions for gender equality. So let's also remember the humanity in everything that we're doing and the humanity of the struggle. It is my pleasure to now introduce Dan Perel. So Dan is representing the Baha'i International Community, who are co-hosting this event, whose wonderful space that we're currently inhabiting. So thank you to all the staff who made everything happen. So each year, the Baha'i International Community releases a statement on the priority theme to stimulate thought and discussion around key concepts to influence the Commission. This year, the statement is titled Reimagining the Role of Institutions in Building Gender Equal Societies. Might see glitter of pink as you exit the building. So I would invite Dan now to share a bit more, but just a little bit about Dan. So Dan joined the Baha'i International Community United Nations Office as a representative in 2011. His areas of work include social and sustainable development, climate change, the environment, global citizenship, human rights, and the role of religion in society. Very small portfolio. He is formerly a global organizing partner of the NGO Major Group and chair of the NGO Committee for Social Development. And in 2010, Dan received a JD from the University of Virginia School of Law and an MA in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts University and was admitted to the New York State Bar Association. Dan has also worked.
What part of abbreviating?
He was very specific. But just for one more thing, I'll finish this. He's worked with the International Service for Human Rights in Geneva, and the UN in Aceh, Indonesia, and other organizations in the Marshall Islands and Chile. So we're very pleased to have Dan.
Thank you for embarrassing me and also allowing me to share a few words. So yes, it's really a delight to see so many faces here, and I love the CSW exactly as a new voice. So I'll try to limit my remarks, but I did want to offer just a few thoughts pertinent to this statement, but maybe not exactly on this statement. First, as I was thinking about the questions, the first thing that came to my mind are what are the qualities that currently underlie our institutions? What are the principles upon which those institutions seem to be founded? The second one is what would we want those qualities to be? If we erased all of the institutions, what would we rebuild? And what would be the sort of the guiding lights of the new institutions? Third question then is how do we get from A to B, assuming they're not the same? And then fourth, I was going to talk a little bit about what's in the statement. So first, where are we? I mean, if somebody were to say, and I was actually going to do a thing where I call on all of you to offer words, but I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But if we were to say, what are some of the qualities and principles that seem to underlie the institutions of society? They might be something along the lines of a few of the words that Andrea said earlier: control, domination, competition. Others I was thinking about are accumulation, so wealth and power accumulation, self-interest or at best constituency interests. You think about what's right for my group. Short-termism, the next election cycle is something that we often hear. 51% is something that I often think about. The goal seems to be in many of these democratic countries anyway, to achieve 51%. And once you get there, you've achieved what you need to. Authority, confidence, assuredness, sort of that projection of your rightness. This is like the qualities of leadership in institutions that seem to define much of the international order. And I would not associate these with what I would love to see. I might use a term like patriarchy, which is, it has all kinds of baggage, but I think those are largely the qualities that seem to underlie that adjective. So then what is it that we would want in our decision-making? It could be things like solidarity, long-term thinking, a whole of society approach, trustworthiness, generosity, compassion, empathy, and even a posture of learning. And what happens when you have a posture of learning is that you can say, I was mistaken, and I'm going to try something different. Imagine if a politician said that today. I mean, they're a flip-flopper, that, it's very difficult. And not just a politician, I don't mean to say it's only in that realm, but even, a father were to say I was wrong. Those are some very hard words for a father to say, especially in front of his children. I say as a father with children. But also, CEOs, really all of us, we're sort of, the culture within which we operate is one where we can't say I was wrong and I need to try a different approach. I think if we expect learning from our communities, it can't start from that place of attachment to our own perspective. So then how do we get there? And I think that the way to get from where we are to where we need to be, it's a little bit of a bootstraps problem, where we need to use those qualities that we hope to achieve in order to eviscerate ourselves, free ourselves from the qualities that we are already embedded in. So we need a learning approach in order to have a learning approach. We need trust in order for there to be trustworthiness. We need, these small steps, these small deeds of achievement in order to create big deeds of achievement. And we have this little problem, and I think that's often why we have such a challenge in achieving the outcomes we wish to see, is that we're embedded within this culture of competition that doesn't really allow for a culture of cooperation. And I think that then maybe brings me to the statement. I can fast forward to that. And one of the challenges that we as an office have often tried to overcome, and we're still trying to work on it, so actually your feedback is most welcome, is how do we introduce learning from the grassroots level into these spaces in a way that's meaningful? Across the street, often the way to do that is by having big numbers. We fed this many people, we have this many women enrolled, this many youth, and that's super important. There's nothing I don't want to diminish the importance of quantitative analysis. But often the real changes that we have found in the Baha'i community are at the very local level. They're actually much more qualitative. It's about a very small process. It's about, if you read the statement, that first paragraph, where the men in this institution decided to serve the women in this institution in order that they could have the kind of consultation that they needed to have to advance their community and to address their needs. Now, it's that men being of service, which in that community in Zambia was a huge step forward. I mean, maybe we're a little privileged in this room where men are often seen serving others, but in other spaces, that's actually a huge step forward. But how do we share that in a way where someone can read it and say, wow, that is a huge leap? And it's very difficult because we want the big numbers. This is the UN, things have to be big, they have to be grand. And so I think what we've tried to do this time is to offer this small story of local change, because ultimately that local change is the drop in the ocean. And with many of them, we have large changes, but share alongside the context of the things that we're talking about today, these bigger institutional questions, these fundamental principles and values that need to underlie society that maybe haven't thus far. And so maybe I'll leave it there with just this sort of dichotomy that we have of the real local level being the places of change, the schools, the dinner tables, those are the real places of change. But then how do we get the UN to sort of internalize that in a way that is meaningful? Because we also don't want the UN to be trying to tell everybody what to talk about at dinner. That's not their role. There's like the subsidiarity dimension as well. And so maybe by trying to find these values, this knowledge that's happening at the local level and share it at the international and offer some suggestions for what those cultures, those habits could look like if they were taking place at the UN. Maybe that's a way that we can offer a different model of learning, and one that is characterized by the characteristics of empathy and compassion, and not sort of competition and power. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. I think that's also something I really appreciate about CSW, is that it has the space for high level discussion, and at the same time, being able to hear from grassroots and all the meaningful change happening in communities from the people that are witnessing it firsthand and bringing it forward too. I'd like to introduce our next speaker now. Her name is Jelena Bighorn, who's joining us virtually from Vancouver this morning. Hi, Jelena. Jelena is a Lakota activist and educator who believes in education as the practice of freedom. For over 17 years, she has worked in the public school system in British Columbia, Canada. She is continuing her studies through a Master of Arts degree in Educational Studies at the University of British Columbia, with a focus on addressing white supremacy culture in schools. Currently, she's a member of British Columbia Teachers Federation Executive Committee, which provides leadership to the 50,000 public school teachers in the province. Her lifelong commitment to decolonization and liberation is realized through her work. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Relatives, I wish I could be in this space with you so that I could greet you properly and to get to know you and to collaborate even more and to hear more of your experiences. I do appreciate the opportunity to join you from this small corner of Canada. And I feel such gratitude to be in a space like this, and I'd want to honor each one of you for the work that you do, because I feel that in my small corner of the world, I am benefiting from the work that you are doing at the tables that you are at, and the time that it takes, the sacrifices that you give to be away from your families to do this good work. It's felt here. Thank you. So there are many different hats that I wear and ways that I am trying to contribute to the empowerment of women, to decolonization and other global movements that we see around the world. But I'm also a classroom teacher, and that is, I find, where I gain my greatest strength. I just left the classroom, and I can assure you that there were empowered young women that I left behind me who will carry on, and they are already reaping the benefits of some of the global initiatives that different countries have taken. A few thoughts that I had around the questions that were given, and they were magnificent because they really pushed me to think about how I have witnessed a different relationship between institutions and individuals. At the BCTF, where I'm an executive member overseeing all of these fantastic public school teachers, there's a lot of questions around how do we have a relationship with the employer in our circumstance. And what I try to bring from a Lakota Indigenous perspective is the importance of relationality, that we are coming as relatives, to remove that sense of an adversary, that we are coming into conflict. And I take that not only as a teaching, but what I know from in history, that when groups of people come together, we often hear of stories of conflict, but I actually hear stories of love. That in the Canadian context, we have a very unique group known as the Métis. These were Cree women who married French traders in such large numbers when they first arrived that they created a new culture. It was love that brought them together. It wasn't conflict. If we had had time to come to know each other's ways, that peace would have continued. So in the spaces that I'm in, at the tables that I'm at, I try to bring that relationality, and it is making an impact. We had a recent AGM with all of these teachers coming together, and it was interesting to see that one of the motions on the table was to ensure that men have a seat at the BCTF table because it's predominantly women. And as we know, teaching is, and at least in Canada, is it predominantly a female occupation. And so some of the male teachers felt that they lacked representation. So they wanted to ensure that they had a designated seat. And in the consultation, I tried to offer some insight again from an Indigenous perspective that sometimes we have to follow nature. In fact, all the times we have to follow nature and the natural rhythms that are present. And for women, we've been living in a winter time, in the winter season, for far, far too long. We are just starting to see those first early blooms of springtime emerge. And so I encourage the members at that space to let us have our season and to know that there will be a time for balance, that it is coming, but give us our season. And it was able to sway the room, and we were able to continue with not having a male designated seat. So I think when there is understanding, especially amongst the younger generation, as to why it is important to empower young women, when that knowledge is there, there's a greater acceptance. I had a conversation with my young son once, like a few years ago. He was crying because he felt that all of the superheroes in his world were women. They're all girls. They have all the superpowers. Every show that he watches, every TV program, it's all women being celebrated. And so I had to have that conversation with him to let him know that historically, this has not been the case. And so once he realized that, and once I reminded him that he has Harry Potter, then he started to see the vision and was able to accept it. So it is in the classroom setting that is where there is so much potential for creating that understanding and that knowledge. And what I encourage my students to consider is are in relation to power over. Who has power over who? And it's an assumption that there is a limited amount of power and that we are jostling to try to get a certain percentage. I try to encourage them to consider that there's another kind of power. There's a power too. And that power is limitless. You could go build a bridge right now. It might not function well and I might not want to step on it, but you can. You could go learn a language. You could go make a new friend. You can right wrongs. There's so many things that we have the power to. And then I encourage them, once they've gotten excited by that concept, to consider an even more impressive power is the power with. When we work together, that is when the true capacity, I believe, of humanity is realized and recognized. And with that power with, there are certain spiritual qualities that will be realized. We'll be able to trust one another. We'll be able to forgive one another. And that in itself, as an Indigenous person coming from a country that is making incredible efforts to reconcile with the Indigenous people, being able to forgive is such an empowering place to be. So these are just a few of the thoughts that I wanted to share in this space. Thank you for having me. And again, I honor the work that you are doing at that table, because I feel that as a classroom teacher, I am able to do the work that I am because you are protecting this space. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jelena. It's always great to hear these stories coming from the grassroots, from the stories from the classroom, and to think that these conversations are happening all across Canada is really a source of inspiration. So thank you. I want to introduce our next speaker now. We have with us today Gania Baha'i. Gania is a Canadian lawyer and advocate for gender equity and migrant justice. As a former staff lawyer at the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic in Toronto, she provided legal services in immigration and refugee law, family law, and sexual assault law to women and gender diverse survivors of gender-based violence. In this role, she supported the clinic's law reform and policy advocacy work, including interventions at the Supreme Court of Canada and submissions before the Canadian House of Commons. Gania has supported clients in navigating complex and intersecting marginalization such as poverty, homelessness, discrimination, and precarious immigration status. Her legal practice is grounded in a trauma-informed, intersectional, anti-oppressive framework. Ania is currently pursuing a Master's of Law at Columbia University in New York, and she's joining us today as a delegate with Young Diplomats of Canada. This delegation aims to center the experiences of youth and advocate for the inclusion of youth in state responses to gendered poverty. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say thank you, Andrea, again, and to the Baha'i Community of Canada for inviting me to participate in this event. It's so lovely to be included here. And I'm also very honored to be representing the Young Diplomats of Canada. Two of my other delegates are sitting across the table from me, Taylor and Ziana. I really appreciate the Baha'i Community of Canada prioritizing youth engagement in this forum. So as Andrea mentioned, I am a lawyer and advocate for survivors of gender-based violence in Canada. I have worked closely with survivors who have experienced the multiplicity of forms of gender-based violence, including intimate partner violence, sexual assault and harassment, human trafficking, and forced marriage. I've also worked with survivors in navigating multiple legal systems, including the family law system, immigration and refugee, criminal and civil law systems. As we're getting to the end of the first week of the commission, I'm sure you may have heard conversations about gender-based violence at different panels and side events. And I want to thank you for your attention while I talk about this issue that's really important to me, that's really important to the Young Diplomats of Canada. And I want to take a little bit of a different approach to my opening intervention. And I want to actually share a story. And that story is a story of a young girl named Kira and her mother, Jennifer. So Kira and her mother lived in the Oakville, Burlington area of Ontario, which is just outside Toronto. Jennifer described her daughter Kira as a bright light, sweet, innocent, spunky 4-year-old with a bright future ahead of her. Jennifer had been separated from Kira's father, and Kira's father had been awarded visitation rights by the family court. During one of these visits on February 9th, 2020, Kira's father took her hiking at a well-known hiking spot called Rattlesnake Point in Milton, Ontario. Later that day, police found both of their bodies at the bottom of a cliff. This was a case of murder-suicide committed by Kira's father, who had an established pattern of physical and emotional abuse against Kira's mother, Jennifer. Prior to Kira's death, Jennifer had been fighting in family court to seek protection for Kira from her father's coercive and controlling behavior. In her family court case, Jennifer had disclosed the domestic abuse she experienced during the relationship and urged the court to suspend the father's ability to visit Kira. Despite the father's erratic and escalating behavior, the judge dismissed Jennifer's claims about domestic violence, stating that the history of abuse was not relevant to parenting and to custody of Kira. Jennifer has been quoted as saying, "When we went to trial in my matter, I was before a judge with a background in labor and employment law, and he cut me off on the stand when I was talking about domestic violence. He told me that domestic violence is not relevant to parenting." Kira's death at the hands of her father sheds light on the consequences of family violence, the devastating impact of violence on children, and the role of the legal system in perpetuating gender-based violence. After Kira's death, her mother, Jennifer, conducted a significant amount of political advocacy and worked with several members of parliament to bring attention to the need to reform the criminal and family law systems. Her tireless advocacy resulted in the passing of Kira's Law in May 2023. And Kira's Law basically requires family and criminal law judges to receive education on domestic violence and coercive control in intimate partner and family relationships. The idea is that with this new training on intimate partner violence and coercive control, judges will have a comprehensive toolbox of understanding of violence and will be better equipped to deal with these types of cases. So through judicial education on domestic violence, judges should have better tools to assess risk and make decisions that are best for children and that also keep mothers safe. I share Kira's story to highlight that gender-based violence is a patriarchy personified. It is the zenith of expression of control over the bodies and autonomy of women, girls, and gender diverse communities. The reality is that there are thousands of Kiras and thousands of Jennifers in Canada and across the globe. Countless women and children have been failed by the legal system before Kira's law and after its passing. I also share Kira's story to ask and implore us to think about the urgency and immediacy by which we need to address gender-based violence, and to consider how slow and incremental systemic change can be. How many women and girls have to be tortured and killed by gender-based violence before institutions are prompted to change? Between 2018 and 2022, the Canadian Femicide Observatory revealed that a woman or girl is killed in Canada every 2 days. That is every 48 hours. Statistics Canada has further reported that 1 in 3 women has experienced unwanted sexual attention and abuse in public. For years, countless civil society organizations, frontline service providers, and survivors of gender-based violence in Canada have been calling for the government to recognize gender-based violence as an epidemic. The World Health Organization called gender-based violence an epidemic back in 2016. And in 2021, during the COVID pandemic, the UN referred to gender-based violence as a shadow pandemic. Finally, just this past August, the Canadian government has officially designated gender-based violence as an epidemic. Despite these developments, the reality is that there are certain communities of women, girls, and gender diverse people that are at high risk of gender-based violence. This includes women with disabilities, Indigenous women, racialized women, trans and non-binary women, and migrant women. The fact that these communities face higher risks of violence is due to the discrimination and barriers they face in accessing social, economic, and legal services. As a result, any meaningful response to gender-based violence requires a transformation of multiple systems and sectors, and the elimination of the enabling conditions that heighten the risk of violence, especially poverty. In reflecting on her horrific experience in the family court system, Jennifer has stated that if her experiences as a white, upper middle class woman in family court was this difficult and traumatizing, then what must the experience be like for racialized women? Thank you.
Thank you, Gania. It was a sobering reality that you shared. It's been really interesting to see across different sectors, the legal sector, the education sector, and also at multilateral forums like the UN, how change really is possible. And we can, really rise from the ashes of horrific experiences like that. I echo Andrea's comments earlier that CSW is really such a wonderful space where we can hear from the grassroots. And it was wonderful to hear from Jelena. And now I want to cross over to Western Australia, where it is currently 4 a.m. or something close to that. We are going to be shared. We're going to have 2 speakers join us who will be sharing insights from a grassroots initiative that has been unfolding in Mosman Park, which is a town in Perth, called the Sisterhood Initiative. Are we playing the video first? Yeah. So first, there is I think this is an initiative that when we were looking at shaping this event, we thought it was really wonderful because it speaks to a reality that we're all familiar with out of a neighborhood. We're all part of a neighborhood. And what's been happening there has been really exciting, and it's created a lot of dialogue with the land council, with the local council. So first we have a message from the CEO of Mosman Park Local Council, Carissa Bywater. Carissa was appointed the Chief Executive Officer of the town of Mosman Park in 2019. Her dedication and passion for the local communities which she has served has seen her lead all aspects of business, finance, and corporate strategy across Australia, including the Forbes Shire Council in New South Wales, City of Bayswater in Western Australia, and now the town of Mosman Park. Providing the Mosman Park community with lifestyle outcomes is what drives, influences, and rewards her every day. So we have a short message from her, and then we'll be joined by Fariba, who I'll introduce after.
When you hear the word institution, what do you think of? Do the words collaboration, equality, and love come to mind? How can we change institutions and begin focusing to influence and relate to others? I'm the CEO at the town of Mosman Park. We are a local government organisation in Perth, Western Australia. As CEO, my work is to enable a culture where people want to stay and for our work to contribute to a better society and planet. For all of us here, our industry is changing, our communities are changing, and we are changing. The 2023 Edelman Survey for Australia shows that trust in government, in media and business So we have to learn to be comfortable with not having all the answers and to enjoy curiosity, to reflect on and learn, to embrace diversity and encourage our people to do the same. But to do this, we need leadership. I trained as an accountant, so I like nice, neat balance sheets. But it's not the neatness and the most clever who survive. It's the most adaptable and brave. I'm in local government because I care. And that helps me make meaning when things get tough, whether that's with my health or with my self is pretty motivating. But I want to share something else I discovered about our work on culture. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals offers us a vision for a better world. One of these goals, number 8, is decent work. And our work on culture, improving employee health and well-being at Little Mozzie Park contributes to this goal. Goal 5 is gender equality, and another is Goal 17, partnerships. A good workplace culture aligns with these goals to foster equality and connection, to enable our community to do amazing things. The sisterhood is a beautiful example of what's possible when people come together, united by a common purpose. Thank you.
Okay, fill in the blanks to your imagination. Thank you to Carissa for that message. And now introducing Fariba. Fariba Fanayan has been actively working in social cohesion in her community through educational endeavours over the last 8 years in her local neighbourhood of Mosman Park. She is the founder of Mosman Park Sisterhood, a Baha'i-inspired organisation that aspires to empower women of all ages and backgrounds to contribute to both material and spiritual transformation of individuals and communities. Fariba is passionate about how systematic educational processes can positively impact the lives of individuals and communities. Thank you for joining us, Fariba.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon and loving greetings to each one of you from the women of Mosman Park who are sleeping right now. So you would have had more people on Zoom. So, and deep gratitude to the Baha'i International Community and the Australian and Canadian Baha'i communities for hosting this gathering, and all the dignitaries and participants for your valuable time and contributions. Before we start, I would like to show and pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm meeting on, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and also to pay our respects to the elders past and present. Thank you. Mosman Park Sisterhood was formed in December 2020, inspired by the story of the Atom, a refugee friend of ours who sadly passed away in October 2020 due to the negative forces of society during the pandemic. The purpose of Sisterhood is to create a regular space where women of all backgrounds and ages can engage in discourses related to the material and spiritual well-being impacting their family, themselves, and their community. So as Dee Awa shared earlier, that's the real focus of what we do. It's empowering women to collectively come together and have deep consultations on what is the material and spiritual reality of our community, of our family, of ourselves, and how can we make transformations. So at the heart of what we do is capacity building and this humble posture of learning, which was mentioned earlier. This learning process is quite key to our endeavors. Inspired by the Baha'i faith's vision, where the world of humanity is likened to the human body. Within this organism of millions of cells, diverse in form of function, play their part in maintaining a healthy system. The key principle that governs the function of the body is cooperation. Its various parts don't compete for resources. Rather, each cell, from its inception, is linked to a continuous process of giving and receiving. Likewise, recognizing the nobility of every person, removing all forms of prejudice, and creating opportunities for everyone to connect, belong, and contribute is at the heart of sisterhood and our interaction at the grassroots with all involved. So we also have a group of us who really are motivated by the following quote from the Baha'i writings. And it's so humbling to be in this space. And I can't express the deep gratitude that we feel being able to present. And this quote shares, "Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age you live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements." So every consultation, every deliberation we have, whether it's with institutions, whether it's with friends, whether at the family dinner, we have that at the forefront of our mind. Sisterhood is responding to the needs of and aspirations of women in Mosman Park. So although we have a really clear socioeconomic disparity in our community, sisterhood has allowed to remove that, and also for women of all backgrounds, especially our Indigenous community, to come together and connect. We have our spaces where the women in retiree villages are interacting with the girls from junior youth groups and the youth in our community. And it's just so lovely to see how this intergenerational learning and interaction is unfolding. At the moment, there are over 130 women with who we're involved with, many with conversations, core activities, and social action initiatives. Some of the social action initiatives, as you could appreciate, have emerged naturally from the grassroots. It's the women coming together, consulting, reading the reality, and then realizing, okay, let's try and address this through doing this. So things like mental health, isolation, supporting single mums to send their children to school, and providing all the necessary resources for the building the capacity of the women of Mosman Park. So one of the questions we are following and learning about at the moment, how can each person contribute to community life and become an active protagonist in the process? So we need to have reconceptualization of the culture. Earlier, there was mention about how do we, what does it look like? What does the new culture or the new system need to look like? And the shift from the power of status, titles, control, domination, greed, and to the power, let's shift it to the power of love, intuition, unity, consultation, collaboration, humility, encouragement, and support. So at the moment, the Mosman Park Council members, the Board of Management and the CEO are really hands-on involved with the women's initiatives in Mosman Park, and they're quite encouraging and generous with their time and resources. So what we've noted in the last few years, trust and cooperation and collaboration has been strengthened with every interaction. Spaces are open alongside for us to learn alongside each other everywhere. So they can come to my home, we go to their boardrooms, they come to the park and meet the women. It's really important that we have a collective unity of vision, purpose, and action in our endeavors. And I just want to note, financial means is only one aspect of this relationship. We need a shift in culture, in attitudes, language, and qualities so we can advance the role of women in communities and society at large. So the question is, how do we foster this culture where there is an environment where the relationship interaction between the three protagonists, individuals, community, and institutions is strengthened and growing? We also draw heavily on the qualities of cooperation and mutual assistance as a basis for how our society advance and progress. I recall a meeting with the deputy mayor and the mayor, and they were saying, we love what you ladies are doing. We'll step aside, we'll support you financially, give you what you need, but we'll just stay out of your way. And it was at that one point I said, we don't want you out of the way. We want you shoulder to shoulder with us. We're here to learn together about the role of women. We're here to consult and continue building on this learning process. So now, friends, I invite you to reimagine our role in building gender equal societies, whereby societies are characterized with hope, justice, equality, inclusion, collaboration, support, and joy, trust, and unity. Thank you so very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Fariba. And friends, I am looking at the time, so I do need to bring today to a close. But what you shared just before, Elizabeth, really did make me think, in exploring today's event and in creating it, we really wanted to look at that relationship between individuals and institutions. Because if there's one thing that we've learned over the last few years, particularly the pandemic, is the very human element of relationships, which the world really functions on. We've increasingly realized how interconnected and interdependent we are. And as humans, we relate to each other very much through relationships. And gender equality will be achieved through stronger relationships, not just amongst ourselves, but between the private sector and multilateral forums, the public sector, and institutions of various kinds. So I just wanted to say this is the end of the event, but hopefully not the end of the conversation. But please, I wanted to also thank our speakers, Beatrice, Gania, my co-moderator, Andrea, Dan, Fariba, Jelena, for joining us. Friends from Australia, I know it's very early for you. Thank you for joining us. And on behalf of Andrea and myself, we'd like to thank all of you for also coming today. Different spaces bring different things, but we really just hope that this would be a point of reflection in what can be a very busy space to really think more deeply about this concept of reimagining the relationships that we have. And we hope you have a wonderfully rich CSW experience and it energizes you as you travel back home. Please enjoy the refreshments that are available for all of you, and thank you.